This is the Plagmanrules podcast. Everybody, welcome back to the Plagmanrules podcast. First one in several months. Now, I started this thing about a year ago to kind of talk about some movie news, some movie topics that were relevant, and so on and so forth. And then when we got to November or so is when I stopped doing these. We had the Oscar race going on, and it was just too much to handle. So now that we're approaching the summer season, I'm going to try and kick it off again with a new edition of the Plagmanrules podcast for today. All right, now, I don't have any set schedule yet as far as how often these are going to come up. Right now, the plan is just to do them whenever there's something big and relevant, something important to talk about, or something that catches my fancy and something I want to just talk about, kind of share my opinions, and so on and so forth. All right, so we've got a couple of things to talk about today. First of all, we're going to talk about the recent news that's coming out here involving Simon Pegg and the Star Wars new trilogy, and as far as his comments on whether or not J.J. Abrams' original idea for who Rey's parents are is something that he's going to retroactively change in Episode 9, or if Rian Johnson stepped in and really changed the game as far as what his original plans were. And then also we're going to talk about the upcoming X-Men films in the 20th Century Fox roster, and how in the past couple weeks here we've now been beginning to see some seeds of possible dismay in Fox's corner, and I'll kind of comment on that and how maybe some things we should be worried about, other things not so much. Okay, so let's get started here with this whole thing. Simon Pegg was recently interviewed and pretty much was quoted as saying that J.J. Abrams had an original idea for who Rey's parents were, and it's not necessarily what's come up in The Last Jedi, Rian Johnson's film. Now, if you go back to the actual quote, Simon Pegg does not quite say that in so many words, and it's more just an assumption that people have made and now have run new headlines with, and so on and so forth. So I don't want to add any fuel to the fire in that way. I think that really what Simon Pegg is saying here, and I don't have the direct quote in front of me, I apologize for that, but he's basically saying that maybe JJ had a different approach as far as how exactly Rey and her parents were involved in the story. So my interpretation of this, and really before we figure out, I think, the bottom line on this, I think we're going to have to actually have an interview with J.J. Abrams or an interview with Rian Johnson, or potentially with the other guy who's writing Episode 9 right now, Chris Terrio. We'll have to ask one of them exactly what's going on here, or somebody maybe like Kathleen Kennedy could shed some light on the subject. I'm thinking that what Simon Pegg means in these comments is, and actually if you go back, Daisy Ridley also kind of had some things to say, not in this recent interview with Simon Pegg, of course, but saying that it was really JJ who told her from the beginning who Rey's parents were. Now, whether that is what happened in The Last Jedi with the reveal of her parents being nobodies, or whether that's, hey, maybe your parent was some off general who worked under Princess Leia or something in the rebellion back in the day. That was kind of my thinking with Simon Pegg's comments, is maybe JJ had an idea that Rey is the granddaughter of Mon Mothma or somebody like that. Or she's the granddaughter of General Dodonna, a couple of higher profile leaders in the rebellion. Now, of course, when a lot of the Simon Pegg quotes are coming around, the word lineage comes up, like relevant lineage and so on and so forth, which would mean that Rey's parents were actually somebody who's been heavily featured in a film, like a Skywalker, like a Solo, like a Kenobi, kind of some of these other names being thrown around, or even Palpatine, of course. And, obviously, before the Last Jedi was released, and in between Force Awakens and Last Jedi, there were how many? Thousands upon thousands of theories that Rey is this, Rey is that, Rey is related to this person, Rey is related to that person. She's the daughter of blank, she's the granddaughter of blank, and so on and so forth. And I even heard some people saying she's actually the mother of Anakin. And it's like, wait a minute, what? So some people even had some time travel theories going around. I don't know what they were on, but that wasn't even close to true. Anyway, so that all being said, I'm thinking what Simon Pegg is talking about in these comments here is not that Rian Johnson came in, and of course, just to briefly bring this up, I am somebody who really liked The Last Jedi. In fact, I preferred it over Force Awakens myself. So there's a lot of doom and gloomers out there who did not like the movie for various reasons. And some of the reasons I can identify with and I can say, okay, I understand why you feel that way. Other reasons are people who are really, really conservative with how they view the original Star Wars movies or even some of the prequel movies. And there were a couple of things in The Last Jedi that kind of bended a couple ideas around like the Force and around lightsabers and so on that were changed in The Last Jedi or kind of shown in a new and different way. And I think that's something that a few of the diehard Star Wars fans just don't want to accept or personally think is going too far. And really, to that argument, I'll say, well, okay, nobody complained about Force speed when The Phantom Menace came out. It's not like you had a whole bunch of people protesting and picketing saying, Luke never ran fast in the original trilogy, so why should these Jedi run fast? Nobody made that argument back then, and I don't see any reason why people have to make the argument today. It's like, as Obi-Wan says, the Force is what gives a Jedi its power. It's an energy field surrounding all living things. It creates us, it penetrates us, it binds the universe together. I can't do a good Alec Guinness, sorry. But anyways, how does that then, I mean, obviously he doesn't say that the Force is an evolving thing, but wouldn't you assume from a big grandiose statement like that maybe the Force is something that changes, it's something that evolves? So that the idea of a couple of the tricks that are used in Last Jedi, maybe that's exactly what the Force is capable of, and it's not just a story trick or whatever you want to say that Rian Johnson threw in for the sake of it. So, yes, so to anybody who really, really hated The Last Jedi for those reasons, I say you're either really stuck up in the old ways of the original movies and you're not willing to accept new stuff, or, I don't know what else to say to you. I mean, that's kind of my bottom line on that thing is I was fine with it. I really dug it. I really liked the movie a lot. I liked it better than Force Awakens, and it felt more like Star Wars to me than Force Awakens. But hey, I'm probably alone on that island actually. But and I didn't think it was a perfect movie either. Definitely that Canto bite and the whole riding the horse thing. Yeah, that was ridiculous. And I on future viewings I'll probably skip over that section of the movie. And that did definitely make the movie a 2.5 hour movie when it could have been a 2 hour 15-minute movie, and it would have been much better off for it. But all that aside, I'm thinking here that there are a lot of people who are taking this Simon Pegg stuff to the extreme and saying that this is another thing that Rian Johnson did to ruin Star Wars and so on and so forth. And really, I think those people are exaggerating it. I think they're really, really butthurt over the fact that Last Jedi was not, the most traditional Star Wars type movie, and it did throw out a couple of other smaller things that most other Star Wars movies have. Like I have a bad feeling about this, which I don't think was used in the film. The famous Wilhelm scream, as far as I remember, was not in The Last Jedi. I've only seen it twice, so I can't, say that with 100% confidence. But as far as I can remember, I don't remember those things. But really, I mean, they're really cute things. They're not, absolutely 100% essential to what makes a Star Wars movie. So, anyways, yeah, I think that's really all I've got to say about it. I think really that part of the reason that this is taking off is just because there are people who are still a little upset about The Last Jedi and who really have not moved on from their lukewarm to negative reception of the film. Okay, and next up, and last thing on the docket for today at least, is we're going to talk about the recent kind of moves and stuff that Fox has been doing with their X-Men films. Now, we're really just talking about Deadpool 2, The New Mutants, and X-Men Dark Phoenix today, really just those three. And I could go into the whole thing of the history of this whole Disney acquiring Fox's properties discussion and all that, which is something I would have really talked about had it, happened while I was still doing Plagmanrules podcast. Now, of course, since then, I could do a special editorial on it and my feelings on it and so on. But really, I mean, we're going to be here an hour if we do that. So I'll briefly say this as far as that goes. I'll just say that I think the idea of Disney or any of these other companies really owning, the equivalent of 2 or 3 studios worth of films and titles and franchises is inherently dangerous and is definitely not a positive movement as far as the Hollywood system goes, as far as filmmaking goes, and it really does draw into the idea of a monopoly in the film industry. And it's something that I'm personally kind of secretly hoping doesn't happen as far as the actual acquisition, because as we know, It's still going through the legal processes at the government level, and it's not going to be known set in stone until probably later this year or early of 2019 before we know for sure that X-Men and Planet of the Apes and Die Hard and all these other big Fox franchises like Alien and Predator and so on are actually going to be acquired by the Walt Disney Company. So until then, I'm kind of secretly hoping, even though, yes, it's going to be cool to see the X-Men join the Marvel Cinematic Universe, it'll be interesting to see Deadpool's interaction with all that. Sure, it could be kind of fun to see a new approach to some of these other big franchises that Fox holds and kind of some of the other properties that they have. And, we could see some really talented filmmakers come in that maybe don't want to work at Fox, but if they're working at Disney, it's fine. Sure, and you can play devil's advocate to that, but I just like the idea of having separate studios producing all these films. But as we're seeing now, the next three films that Fox is producing in association with Marvel properties, again, are Deadpool 2, X-Men, Dark Phoenix, and The New Mutants. So first of all, let's talk about whether or not they're in trouble, because that's really a headline that's kind of been going around the past 2 weeks in speculation. Because Deadpool 2, while it seems like a real slam dunk when it's coming up here, because it's actually going to be released here a little over a month from now, closer to a month and a half, but really, it looks like now that Infinity War has moved up a couple weeks, or actually 1 week, I should say, and that's given more room for that to make its money, and then Deadpool 2, I think, is going to benefit from that with a bigger opening. Other than that, really, everything else has been going against Deadpool 2 as far as the development and shooting phases go. Because number one, we had a whole thing with the original director of the film not coming back. Tim Miller was the original director on the first film, and he parted ways with the project, and now he's going over to do the new Terminator film. But since then, they've gotten one of the John Wick directors, David Leitch, who also did Atomic Blonde last summer. I actually enjoyed that film. I mean, not loved it, but it was a fun watch. So David Leitch is now in the director's chair. Then you had the really tragic occurrence during filming where a stunt woman died in a motorcycle accident. I want to say that was back in October or September, sometime around there. Maybe it was earlier than that. I'm sorry, I don't have the direct dates in front of me here, but that was definitely something that's not cool. Definitely something that taints the project a little bit. In the same way that I think Expendables, the second one, had the same problem. And we're seeing, Walking Dead had a stunt person who was tragically killed during the production, I think on season 8 or season 7, whichever one it was. It's becoming, a bigger thing now. And it should be addressed when it happens. It's definitely not, definitely not anything to celebrate. It's definitely something that we have to acknowledge as these guys literally, and gals too, because it was a female stunt woman who died on Deadpool 2 here. These are people that are putting their lives on the line when they're doing these entertainment films. So that looks okay. So now that we've got all that out of the way, then a big thing hit, and this is, I want to say, back in January with T.J. Miller, when all of a sudden he had a lot of people coming out against him, saying that when he was in college that he was kind of date raping and really just being an awful human being. And I think to this day we haven't come to the end of our kind of big Hollywood outing moment that we had last year. With the real rise of the Time's Up movement and the Me Too movement and so on, I still think that we're going to be, talking about that for the next few months. And, this was one, T.J. Miller, that one kind of came and went. It wasn't like Weinstein, obviously. It wasn't like Kevin Spacey or Charlie Rose, where they were big headlines for a long time. Matt Lauer and all the rest of them here. They were big headlines for, a week or two, and all these stories came out. But with T.J. Miller, it was something, it came up once, and then it really didn't take off from there. The same thing happened with like Stan Lee and a couple of the other entertainers out there, that a couple of them just didn't really land. And so I think there's still some people who are really upset about his involvement in the film. And definitely I think that from the trailers we've seen, it looks like he has a smaller part than he did in the first film. And personally for me, I didn't really like his character too much in the first film. I really thought, sure, he's not essential to the storyline, but he was, he had some good comedic relief moments. At the same time, I wasn't really a fan even of the casting. For me, T.J. Miller just has never 100% done it for me. He's just never absolutely stood out for me in anything that he's done that I have happened to see too. In that regard, it definitely was a speed bump. It wasn't something that halted production. They didn't have to go back and do reshoots and replace him or cut him out of the film and work around it. It wasn't quite like that. He's still going to appear in the film. That all being said, with all those things, and also the recent cancellation of the Deadpool series, that or not Danny Glover, sorry, Donald Glover was going to work on. That also, it definitely puts a bad name in Deadpool's mouth again, even if it's just for a minute. But still, that's something that doesn't help you, especially with the new movie coming out relatively soon. All of that aside, though, my goodness, has the marketing campaign for this movie been excellent, though. That first trailer where they made fun of Bob Ross and Deadpool played Bob Ross. I mean, seriously, that trailer made me laugh harder than any trailer I've seen probably in the last 2 or 3 years. That and the Inherent Vice trailer. If you go back to that first Inherent Vice trailer, that is freaking hysterical. When what's his name? Joaquin Phoenix is like sorry to go off topic for just a minute, but seriously, this is great. Joaquin Phoenix, remember he gets handed the photograph and he's like, "Can I see that picture?" Ah! Mm-hmm. And he just changes instantly. I remember the first time I saw that preview was like 10 o'clock at night, and I didn't want to wake everybody up, but I was like crying. I was laughing so hard. It was pretty much the same thing with the Joy of Painting Bob Ross spoof, the first Deadpool trailer, and even then, it didn't really have too much of the footage from the movie to show, but still, that got me way, way more excited for the film than I was. And personally, I liked the first Deadpool movie. I thought it was very funny. It was a nice turn on a comic book movie, but was it, the game changer that a lot of people make it out to be? No. Was it a masterpiece? No. So I've watched it. I watched it once in the theater, and then maybe once or twice after it was out on Blu-ray DVD. But really, that's about it. And then the second trailer, when they showed like Cable's effects weren't done yet, so they had to go back and do like the Toy Story version of it. That made me laugh very, very hard. So that, and then the last preview they just put out a couple weeks ago was pretty good. It wasn't as good as the first two, but those two are really tough to top. So, and kind of another interesting thing too is they're not really giving away too much of the plot of what this movie's about. I mean, sure, they're showing that Cable's in it, and there's this kid character that Deadpool has to protect that Cable's after, and we're going to see the beginning of the formations of the X-Force, and we're going to see some of our favorite characters from the first movie back, like his roommate, what's her name, Al or something. That was something they should have shown more of in the Blind Al. That's the name of the character. I really liked her character, and I think they should have used her more in the film. That was kind of a missed opportunity for me, but it's good to see that she's back. Hopefully she gets more to do in this one, and she's not just a wasted thing. The Negasonic Teenage Warhead character and Colossus, the other two X-Men that really helped out Deadpool in the first film, those two I want to see back in full force in the movie. It looks like they're going to have some stuff to do. So I'm really looking forward to those characters coming back, too. So, yeah, I mean, that's really all I got to say about this. Deadpool 2 is definitely going to be a big hit when it comes out. I think it's going to do well financially, of course. Critically, I think it's going to do as well, if not maybe a little worse than the first film. I don't really see this one coming out with like 99 or 98% on Rotten Tomatoes, but I definitely think it's going to be well received. It's going to do well, and it's going to be a bright spot for the Fox Marvel properties for a while. Okay, with that all being said, now, we originally had the Dark Phoenix movie, and that's X-Men Dark Phoenix, I should say that's the official title. That was originally set for release back in November of this year, 2018, with Simon Kinberg making his feature directorial debut, and he also had a big hand in the script, and it's really going to be kind of the former big-time adaptation of the storyline of Dark Phoenix Saga. So it looks like this is going to be, like a big thing. It's going to be the continuation of the Days of Future Past and the First Class and X-Men Apocalypse, those characters and that whole storyline that's going on. So you have all those characters back, like Quicksilver and the new Nightcrawler, Storm, of course, Jean Grey herself, the new Cyclops, Beast, Mystique, and Magneto, and Xavier, and even Psylocke is coming back. So it's like, yeah, you get all these characters back again. That's going to be fun. We'll see. I mean, obviously, I don't think Hugh Jackman's going to show up, but it's like, it's going to be good to see all of these characters again. And personally, I think that to go back through that other trilogy that they were all in, that the first one, First Class, was really, really good. It really got me into the new X-Men films. Days of Future Past is a brilliant movie. Absolutely gets a little bit disrespect, I think, that it doesn't deserve. I think it's an absolutely great movie, and probably the best of the X-Men franchise. And then, for whatever reason, Apocalypse, I liked. Now, did I think it was the best of the trilogy? No, it was definitely the worst. But but it wasn't like a epic fall. It wasn't the last stand of this new trilogy. I didn't think it was that bad. There were definitely elements to it that I thought were totally forgettable. The whole third act was very predictable and very, very effects heavy, and you could tell that some of the effects didn't look all that great. Some of some of the storytelling, even in the third act, I thought was really sloppy. But overall, I thought there were really strong moments. Like the Quicksilver scene was still fun. All the stuff that happens with Magneto in the film, I thought was actually very, very well done, and a great performance too from Michael Fassbender. One of his best performances, actually, in this whole franchise was in Apocalypse, and everybody kind of seems to overlook that. Even Oscar Isaac as Apocalypse himself, I thought was maybe not an outstanding performance, but it was better than most. It's definitely something that I think people overlook. And the film overall, yeah, like I said, I've only seen it a couple, 2, 3 times. And yeah, sure, on the second and third viewing, some of those problems come out a little more prevalently, but still, I think it's a film that people need to maybe look at again. And maybe after Dark Phoenix comes out, it looks like maybe that could change that opinion a little bit. But for the time being here, it looked like Dark Phoenix was kind of, one that people weren't sure what to think of. Because, first of all, you were coming off of Apocalypse, which was, for the most part, negatively received by the fans and the critics. Number two, you had Simon Kinberg come on as the director, and he's actually the solo writer on the film. Now, seeing as he had written all the new films like First Class, Days of Future Past, and Apocalypse, sure, he was writing those, but directing and writing are two totally different things. And also, just the fact that, again, you had people like Jennifer Lawrence who looked like she was totally phoning it in Apocalypse, and McAvoy and Fassbender who were really moving on to new and interesting parts in their career, especially McAvoy was Split and so on and so forth. It's like some people just were really turned off to the idea of these characters coming back and them doing a follow-up to X-Men Apocalypse. It's like, well, we kind of had that and it kind of ended and, that was it. But nope, they want to do at least one more, and then after that, we'll see if the Fox deal goes through or not. And this could be the last one of that whole era of X-Men films. We'll see. But then it felt like things were starting to turn around because we had the Entertainment Weekly photos come out, and those looked pretty good. There was even the news that came out about Bryan Singer and how his whole philosophy on being on set and his kind of absence on set kind of affected some of the other productions, not Dark Phoenix, Apocalypse being chief among them. And so that made me think, okay, well, if Kinberg is willing to step up to the plate and really go to town on this film, I was like, I think if he's gung-ho enough, if he has enough belief in himself, and if he's been on set enough on some of these previous movies, I think he can do a really decent job at worst here. Obviously, it could be a disaster when it comes out, too. But at the same time, it's like, he's a good choice. Him, or you could pick a dozen other people, but it looks like that's a good way to go. And then we get a big release date change. I've heard a couple of conflicting ideas as to why we're getting some really late in the game reshoots. Now, one of the reasons has to do with scheduling, and that's because it's quite a packed cast included here in the film. Now, obviously, James McAvoy, it looks like he is pretty much done with the follow-up to Split, which is Glass, so that's really the only other big property he has coming out. Fassbender, I think, is doing one other film, maybe like an Oscar contender film, so he's working. Jennifer Lawrence is working on some other projects. Some of them are behind-the-scenes projects, too, where she's behind the camera. Nicholas Hoult is also in the film. He seems pretty open. Ty Sheridan was doing the marketing campaign and stuff for Ready Player One, and he's been kind of busy with that for the past month or so. But really, the one person everybody was talking about, well, two people that everybody was talking about were Jessica Chastain, who's the new villain of the film, and Chastain is a very, very hard working woman when it comes to Hollywood today. both, again, in front of the camera and behind the camera. She is really becoming a big proponent of women-led films. So she, I believe, is shooting another film right now as well. She's also got a film with Octavia Spencer, which is still in the development phase, with Michael Showalter being recently announced as the director. It's kind of a modern-day take on Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, which has me excited, at least. That sounds great. Pairing those two together with that storyline, or kind of a similar one. It didn't work out with that Due Date movie with Robert Downey Jr. and Zach Galifianakis, but that was a whole different story. That was pretty much a direct ripoff. But anyways, this one sounds like it's more in the spirit of Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, with a bit of acknowledgement of that, and where it could be almost like a pseudo sequel to that film. So she is very, very, very busy with that. But the other person, of course, is Sophie Turner. Of course, with Game of Thrones wrapping up its final season, and that, of course, it's not going to come out for, I think, a whole year plus from now. It's still something that you take a lot of time and a lot of effort to do that. Plus, it's going to be, I'm sure a lot of those episodes are going to be close to feature length films as far as how long they are and stuff. They're all going to be 70 minutes plus, or a good chunk of them at least. So that means you got to put a lot. It pretty much becomes a mini series at that point, like the amount of work you have to do. So that all, being part of the conversation there, I definitely think that's part of the reason why they have to push the film back, because getting all these people together is tough just with the initial shoot. Then with reshoots, and some of them I've heard are just pickups and just stuff like that, simple stuff. They're not going back and changing the script from page one. It's not those kind of reshoots. So it looks like that's part of the reason. Then also I've heard some of the visual effects in the movie are going to be pretty advanced or pretty hardworking stuff. So it looks like those reshoots are not going to be big-headed stuff, but it's going to be stuff involving everybody, stuff that involves some visual effects that are going to have to be worked in, and so on and so forth. And it looks like the amount of time left, because it's supposed to come out in November, that's about 7 months from now, and it was going to be early November, too. So then you have to think about it. Okay, well, that means you don't have everything done the day before release. You have to have everything done, like, at least 2 or 3 weeks in advance, so you can get those early reviews going, so you can make sure you have picture and edit lock in time, but without going back and changing something, and so on and so forth. It's a lot of work to get that thing done. And some of them get done months ahead of time. Some of them get done, a mere few days. I mean, it's a tricky game in that regard. But still, with a big kind of special effects heavy superhero movie like this, you want to have ample time to get everything going and make sure everything is great. So they changed the release date, and now it's set for Valentine's Day of 2019. Now, as far as competition on that date goes, I think we have the new Rebel Wilson film coming out then, but I think that's about it. Now that those god-awful 50 Shades of Grey movies are done, we don't have to worry about one of those coming out next year. So it looks like it has that date all to itself. It also is going to be President's Day weekend, which a recent film really benefited from that. That's called Black Panther. That really benefited from opening on President's Day weekend. I think it would have done exceptionally well regardless if it was President's Day weekend, the weekend after, or the weekend before. It would have done spectacular business either way. But I think having that extra day off for most people definitely helped build that movie up box office wise. So we'll see if Dark Phoenix can also benefit from that. So this is one where I'm believing in this cast, I'm believing in this story, I'm believing in this director, at least for the moment, and this writer as well, because I have enjoyed the previous 3 films. So I think this is one where, okay, there were a couple of things they need to change, there's a couple of things here and there that they want to rework and retool a little bit, but most movies go through that nowadays. Most movies. Some of them do it so well you don't even hear about it. Now this is one we did hear about, so does it kind of lower my excitement for it a little bit? A little bit, yes. But not a ton. I'm still pretty excited to see how this one turns out. Okay, now we're gonna get to the elephant in the room here. That's the New Mutants. Okay, first of all, this movie had a preview come out, I want to say in October of last year, and that preview, very well done. It was very effective. It didn't make me jump, but it was definitely like, okay, I see what they're going for here. Looks like they've achieved it. It's definitely a more horror-based X-Men kind of film, and it looks like they did a good job on it. So I was like, okay, I'm excited to see it. It comes out on Friday the 13th, which actually would have been this next coming Friday, April 13th. I was like, it looks good. It looks like, and Josh Boone's the director. I liked his Fault in Our Stars movie. It definitely wasn't something I've gone back and seen 20, 50 times since it came out, but it's definitely something I'm like, he did a better job with that movie than most directors probably would have done. And that material in other people's hands, other directors' hands, could have been a dumpster fire. But it turned out to be a pretty enjoyable movie. And at times, a very interesting movie and a very involving movie with the cast and with the crew that he had there. So he moves on to do this one, and for me personally, I've never ever gotten anywhere close to being familiar with what the hell the New Mutants is as far as their comic book origins and stuff. I'm always like, with some of this off-brand stuff like this, and New Avengers and Young Avengers, whatever they're called, I'm always like, okay, that's something else. I'm not going to get into it. I don't know what it is, and it feels like there's too much work to get everything cleared out. But anyways, this is one where I was like, okay, at least I've heard of what Sunspot is, and I've heard of Wolfsbane. I've heard of some of those characters before. Some of them maybe were mentioned in previous X-Men films or something. But I've gotten some familiarity with them, at least just with their names. And then I think it was first announced, I want to say back in February or January, somewhere around there, that they were going to push the film back to February of 2019. And I was a little disappointed in that, because really the reason why they were doing that is because they felt like the film was too horror based and it wasn't superhero enough based. It didn't have enough of a vibe of some of the more recent other Marvel proper films like Thor Ragnarok or Spider-Man Homecoming, which had elements of humor to them, even though for the most part they were pretty serious stories. They managed to make them entertaining, fun films. I think that's something Fox wanted to kind of step back and say, well, we can have it be a horror film, but we need moments of levity in it. And to me, I'm like, okay, well, there were moments of levity in Fault in Our Stars, and I thought that actually was one of the better elements of that film. Some of the dramatic stuff for me actually didn't work, but some of the comedic elements in those films and some of the romance elements in that film, I think did work. So if Josh Boone wants to go back and add that, it sounded fine to me. It sounded like, okay, well, hopefully it makes it better. Otherwise, if not, I'm sure there'll be some cool deleted scenes we can check on the Blu-ray when that comes out and so on and so forth. But now we're hearing it's pushed back again. Now it's pushed back to August of 2019. Okay. Well, first of all, the film was, only a month or two out when they pushed it back 10 months to February of 2019. That, usually when that happens, that's a terrible, terrible sign. And the whole reason that it happened was basically because of some fan screenings that went good, but not great. They didn't get the big reception that they were hoping for. So they wanted to do reshoots. Again, when we look at this cast, there's another Game of Thrones alumni in here, Maisie Williams, and she's I don't know, I don't watch Game of Thrones, so I'm sorry, I don't know these characters and who they play, but I know the names of a lot of the cast. So I don't know how much important she is. I don't know how very important Sophie Turner is, but I know that these are two characters who have been from day one bigger characters in that whole series. So if they're shooting Game of Thrones now, that means that she's really going to be unavailable for the most part. Also, you got another kind of bigger name is Anya Taylor-Joy, who, again, has been doing some press from a previous movie. I wanted to see it. It was called Thoroughbreds. I really wanted to see it, but it came and went. I wasn't able to see it. And also, she's doing the same movie that James McAvoy is, Glass, of course, the sequel to Split. So she's busy on those two. Plus, I think there's maybe one or other two films that she was doing. You've also got Charlie Heaton in the cast. His is a name that's starting to come up more and more, so he's doing stuff. The other two actors I'm not as familiar with, so I don't know how busy they are, but it seems like that's another issue maybe that came up, and maybe part of the reason why it did get pushed back again, but I don't think that would be enough of a reason to push it back an additional 6 months, it was right around 6 months. Because this was originally that February 14th release of 2019 was New Mutants, but then They have to push Dark Phoenix back, which means they have to push this one back again. So if they had just pushed it back to, say, that same April date, or a close April date, or something like that, or if they pushed it back to, say, May or June, which really May would have been troublesome because you've got the new Avengers movie coming out in May. Also, if you put them out in April, you've got Captain Marvel to deal with, which is a holdover from kind of mid to late March. So that's another thing to consider there. There might be one other big movie coming out in 2019 in April that I'm forgetting about right now, but I want to say like one of the Godzilla movies is coming out then. So yeah, it was going to be, pretty tight competition there, and you don't want to get too far into summer with a brand new property like this because those tend to not do well in late summer. So yeah, that kind of, makes it tougher on that regard, and I understand that, sure, but again, part of the reason why they're saying this is getting pushed back further is they want to do pretty much, without saying it, I'm not quoting anybody here, they pretty much want to do a page one rewrite. They pretty much want to go back and completely rework the film. And now it's not going to be so much a mix between a superhero film and a horror film. It's now going to be a straight up horror film, which, coming from Josh Boone, who also in previous interviews has said he is a big fan of horror movies, which gets me excited. And also the way that the poster makes fun of, or not, I shouldn't say makes fun of, but is in the same style of like Nightmare on Elm Street and stuff. That stuff I dig, and I'm very, very happy about that. But wasn't horror what you were originally doing? So don't you kind of already have a version of this film ready? What is stopping you from, say, putting this out in November on that original date for Dark Phoenix? What is stopping you from getting, say, I don't know, a late August release, or maybe an early September release? Because another big film that they mentioned here was It, the Stephen King one, and how that maybe will influence their reshoots on this. So don't you already have a version of that movie pretty much done? I mean, maybe you have to do a couple, pickups on that, and you have to kind of work on that a little bit. But shouldn't that be like 90% done or 80% there? I mean, what's going on that you have to reshoot something horror-based that was originally horror-based? I mean, you get what I mean here? It's kind of frustrating in that way. And this is one, again, that trailer was well done. I mean, maybe not the best thing ever, but it got my attention from a movie that didn't really have my attention. And, nowadays, I don't really have that happen to me much anymore. Nowadays, it's stuff like that new Skyscraper movie with Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. I was like, oh, it kind of sounds interesting because it's about this and this and this, and it's called Skyscraper, so it's going to be... And then the trailer comes out, and I'm like, oh, it's just another Dwayne Johnson vehicle, and it doesn't look entertaining in the least, at least to my eyes. I'm kind of sick of those kind of movies. So in the same way that a movie that I'm actually looking forward to seeing here, it's opening tomorrow, is A Quiet Place, where I saw the trailer for that, I want to say back in January or February, in the theater. I had not seen it online. I saw it in the theater first. And that whole trailer had me hook, line, and sinker with the idea, because I'm like, oh, cool, so these people are living in a place where they can't make a sound. And I'm like, well, why can't they make a sound? And then when they reveal, oh, it's monsters, I'm like, oh, again, with the fucking monsters. I am sick of those kind of movies where it's a monster, is coming out to get you. Now, obviously, and the movie's getting great reviews, so I'm willing to give the benefit of the doubt to this one, because it does look otherwise like it is a masterfully done film. Surprisingly, from John Krasinski, who's not known as a director yet. Maybe this will change it. But at the same time, it's like, that trailer had me, with those ideas, like especially when they're like playing the board game and they have to roll the dice on carpet and stuff, and when they're signing to each other over dinner, and that's how they have their dinner conversations, is through sign language. I'm like, oh, that is so original and looks so really, really good. And in the same way, also another Paramount release of late is Annihilation, another one I didn't have the chance to see, but I really, really did want to see. It looked like it was a movie that's all about kind of the philosophical sci-fi thing with maybe a little bit of some action elements and so on. But when they reveal, oh, part of it is monsters too, I'm like, that kind of took me out of it. So I'm kind of sick of that idea. Really, the whole point I'm getting to here is trailers, for the most part, are taking me out of films more than they're putting me in films nowadays. Making me interested in new films. But New Mutants managed to do that. So at this point, it doesn't look good. Now, obviously, one other element we haven't talked about here is now the new reshoots are going to add Antonio Banderas in some capacity. Now, I've heard two conflicting ideas. I've heard one of those is a post-credit scene and that's it. Another idea I've heard is that he comes in late in the second act or early in the third act as the villain. So possibly Mr. Sinister or one of these other kind of more famous X-Men villains. But we'll have to see on that. And Antonio Banderas, I've been wondering where the hell he's been. He's a great, talented actor. Haven't really seen him do much lately, but you know, he's off doing his own thing. That's fine. So I think he's a great addition to the cast, though. So that gets me a little pumped for it because hopefully then somebody like him on set can turn this thing around a little bit, and hopefully they can get their act together because this had me hook, line, and sinker with the trailer. It looked really, really entertaining. Had a good release date. Had a good cast. It still has a good cast too. But now it's looking more and more like this could actually just turn out to be a hot mess. So I'm not real. I mean, I'll have my fingers crossed for this one, but it doesn't look. I mean, my optimism is really just at fingers crossed. I'm not. I'm not going to bet the farm on this one being an outstanding addition to the Marvel Fox universe. Okay, well, there we go. That's going to do it for today's edition of the Plagmanrules podcast. I'll be back again next time, whenever that is, whenever something interesting comes out in the news that that catches my fancy. All right, so we'll catch you guys next time. And if, by the way, if this is the first time you've listened to a new edition of the Plagmanrules podcast, I do have old episodes going back to last fall. Some of those I think are more entertaining than others. I don't know. I'll let you guys decide that. But if you're kind of a more recent addition to the channel here and you found this interesting, yeah, go back and check out some of those old ones and be sure to leave a comment. Let me know what you think about the podcast, things you like, things you don't like. Just give me some general feedback on that. Sounds good. All right. Well, we'll catch you guys next time.